Welcome to the Bi-Geekly Report, your bi-weekly take on queer representation in geek pop culture. I'm your host, Elle Sanchez. I don't know if you can tell by my homemade 11 costume, this 11 from Stranger Things. I was going to bring Eggos to eat, but my partner ate all the Eggos at our house. But I don't know if you can tell from this, but this is our Bi-Geekly horror/Halloween themed episode. And in this episode, we're going to talk about some of my favorite horror films that informed my queerness growing up. I'm positive there are a lot of lists out there on the internet and beyond that are some of the best queer films that you can watch that are horror films that have queer characters and queer actors in them that are positively represent the queer community. Those probably exist. This is not going to be that. This is a list of horror movies that I enjoyed growing up and have enjoyed as an adult that I find to be very queer and have sort of informed my own queerness. But they're not necessarily actually listed as queer films, but a lot of queer people besides me enjoyed them. And for me, I felt like they sort of represented me and helped me view the world differently. But, so it's really more personal to movies that I find gay that are horror movies, but aren't necessarily labeled as such. A lot of times queer characters in horror films have been represented as the murderers, as the killers, as the crazy people in the film. That's been kind of common as far as queer representation goes. Basically, queer people have been psycho killers since the movie Psycho, where I'm pretty sure the main character was closeted. But so it's been like you got your sleepaway camp, Freddy's Revenge, Nightmare on Elm Street 2, which is a very homoerotic film. You can watch a lot of different videos on the internet that discuss that to a long extent. But in general, some of these films are going to have queer characters that are villains, but I still felt like a lot of these movies may not like positive representation, but for me, it was the first time I saw kind of queerness on the screen, especially in a horror kind of aspect, which is my favorite kind of film. The first movie I want to talk about is The Lost Boys, which for a lot of queer people, it's just a staple of a horror movie you got to watch around Halloween. It's not inherently supposed to be a queer storyline, but it's very gay when you watch it. It's one of the best movies. It's basically about a kid who moves to a new town. It's kind of beachside town. And the kid is played by Jason Patrick. I think he's supposed to be in high school in the movie, or maybe young 20s, but he's a hot, young Jason Patrick. And then his younger brother, played by Corey Haim, still looking okay, doing okay at the time. And their mom, they move to, this town. And then there's these bad teens, or maybe 20s. I think everyone's supposed to be in their 20s, but they're kind of, a little vampire clan that's run by Kiefer Sutherland and Bill from Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. I can't remember that actor's name, but a bunch of hot vampire dudes. Everybody looks like they're in a cool 80s music video. Everybody's in a Billy Idol kind of music video, or Adam Ant or something. And there's so much sexual tension between Jason Patrick's character and Kiefer Sutherland. Just from the minute when they introduce the first oiled down shirtless guy playing a saxophone, you're like, okay, this is pretty gay. There is a woman in it who I always mistake for Ali Sheedy, but it's not Ali Sheedy. It's another actress from the 80s. She is the main character, as the love interest for Jason Patrick's character, but she's a kind of, even though there's fights between her and Kiefer Sutherland is supposedly in love with her too, she kind of plays a backseat to the real sexual tension between the two main characters. And also Corey Haim's character, he's got very gay overtones happening. He sings musicals and show tunes when he's taking a bath. He's got a poster of a very sexy Rob Lowe in his bedroom that's just giving you sex eyes in the poster. So in general, this movie has a very gay vibe, and it's just really fun. And I love The Lost Boys. Next movie I want to mention it's kind of a twofold. First, I want to start with one of the classics of all time for all queer, especially queer women, is The Craft. And we love The Craft. I love The Craft so much. It's if you haven't seen it, I mean, sure you have, but let's say you haven't. It's about a group of teenage girls who are witches, and then a new girl comes down. It's always a new person comes to town. They're you. That's how like cinema works. Like you're represented by the new person that comes to town and meets the, main characters. So, Robin Tunney moves there with her dad, her single dad. I think her mom has passed away, and she befriends, it's a Catholic school. She befriends these, gothy kind of outsider 3 girls who turn out to be witches. And turns out Robin Tunney is also a witch. She's a natural witch. The other girls learn their witchery through book reading or whatever. And then they become a coven and they cast spells, which eventually it goes all right. It's, how that works. But it's got Fruza Balk in it. It's got Neve Campbell. It's got that actress that was in like The Two of Us or the show I used to like on UPN. God, I can't remember her name. But it's really fun. I love The Craft. When I watched this in middle school, all my friends in my small town, like all the queer girls that I hung out with, and nobody talks about being queer, but we like knew that was our thing that unified us, but we acted like it was because we all wore baggy silver tabs or whatever, but it was because we were queer. And we would like started covens. That was The Craft was one of the main things. We were like, now we're witches, and took spell books from the library we never returned, and whatever, did spells on each other, love spells on each other to practice for the boys, which just meant we made out. It was just great. Thank you, The Craft, for being an excuse for every time I got to like make out with a lady in middle school. And the movie's really fun. And speaking of The Craft, there was a sort of, I guess you could say, gender swap version of it. Not really, not literally, but it's called The Covenant. And in that film, that's a newer film. The Craft's from the 90s. And The Covenant, I believe, is early 2000s, late 90s, I'm not sure. But it's all men who are witches. And they're also in a small town. Kind of similar story. One of them comes from a long line of, he's like the good guy, and then there's blah, blah, blah. Then there's like a bad witch guy who tries to get the other witches against him. It's got like a young Taylor Kitsch in it, Sebastian Stan, I'm not sure how you say his last name, who plays Winter Soldier in the Marvel movies. But there's a lot of shirtless dudes. There's a lot of I feel like there's a lot of showers that happen. And some of them have like girlfriends or whatever, but that's like not even the main story. There's the best part of it is there is a barn witchcraft fight in which they have a witch off. And in the witch off, one of the main, I think it's Sebastian Stan, but you could correct me on that. When the main bad guy, he says to the other guy, as he's like, kind of beating him down with all of his witch powers, he goes, "I'm going to make you my weotch." just really great. So do a double feature of The Craft and The Covenant. The Craft is much better, but The Covenant is pretty fun. Both way gay as far as I'm concerned. Next movie I want to talk about is not technically a horror movie. It's got some gory elements. It's definitely dark for sure. It's a little bit of a comedy. I'm talking about Heathers, classic film from the 80s. This movie informed a lot of my sense of humor, but also my bisexuality at the time so hard, because the two main characters are played by Winona Ryder, like a young, gorgeous, kind of androgynous Winona Ryder, and a young, gorgeous, kind of androgynous Christian Slater, both with like their perfect black hair and their dark humor, and they smoking, and they're like making rude jokes, and they're like blowing up schools, and they're being badass. And there's kind of, I guess there's sexual tension between them. They're sort of a thing, but they're not sort of a thing. It's great. If you haven't seen Heathers, oh my God, you really need to, because so much of our pop culture life has been informed by this film. Quick synopsis is it's just that there's popular girls in the school, the Heathers. I don't think all their names actually are Heather. I think they kind of all adopted Heather after the main girl, but I can't remember. But they go by like Heather B or Heather whatever. And there's a main girl that kind of runs the crew. And Winona Ryder, who's the new kid, as per usual, she gets kind of adopted into that crew. If you haven't seen Heathers, you really should, because so much of that film has informed like the pop culture landscape since the 80s. Like there's so many really popular quotes from that movie and just ideas and sense of humor that have since been kind of copied and used in other films. But specifically, there are quotes like, "Fuck me gently with a chainsaw." Obviously, everybody says that still. Or, "What's your damage?" One of the storylines of them setting up these two football players that they murder, who they leave notes to imply that they're gay. There's a scene where one of the parents says, "I love my dead gay son," which has problematic elements to it. But at the time, at my age, seeing that film, I was kind of like, no one, a movie that a lot of teenagers were seeing was talking about gayness, and I got excited about that. And there's also a very like sort of queer vibe between the Heathers, and definitely Winona has that very like, she's got that hard femme soft butch thing going, which I'm super into. She's pretty kind of androgynous, and she always gave me like sort of definitely like a queer vibe. And she's like the outcast, the one like, from the other Heathers, and it's a really fun film. It's always had like a really gay vibe to me. So you should see it if you haven't, or if you have, that it's a classic. Next movie we need to talk about, you may have been waiting for me to mention this. It's Interview with a Vampire, which was, to me, as a kid, I saw this in the theater, I thought was the gayest movie I'd ever seen. I was so like aroused, shocked, surprised, happy with how seemingly gay it came off to me. This is, of course, the film based on the Anne Rice novel, starring Tom Cruise, Brad Pitt, Antonio Banderas. It was supposed to be River Phoenix, but he had passed away by that time, so Christian Slater takes over his role. It's just a lot of really hunky, like effeminate, like dudes, and like just kind of sucking on each other. And it's like, and of course, this is Brad Pitt at his most beautifulness. I'm not saying he's still a beautiful man, but this is a young, very like just very soft Brad Pitt. This is Tom Cruise before we knew that he was a Scientologist. Not that that's bad. I'm just kidding. It's bad, whatever. But this is Tom Cruise at his like still height of his popularity, and Antonio Banderas when like the States were just kind of learning about this beautiful Spanish man. And it's just it's so, and Kirsten Dunst is in it too. She's the annoying little girl vampire, but it's so like there's so much homoeroticism in this film. It's also like French and Cajun and Southern and gothic and dark. I'm sure the novel is probably gayer than the movie. I feel like Anne Rice has definitely said that. I have not read the novel, so I'm not going to pretend I have, but I did like Anne Rice a lot when I was a kid, the idea of Anne Rice, because I never read any of her books. But I did go on a tour in New Orleans, like a ghost tour when I was 16, where they went by Anne Rice's house, and it was pretty rad. So this movie is great. You should see Interview with the Vampire if you haven't. If anything, it'll remind you that at one point we all loved Tom Cruise. And maybe some of you still do. I don't know. The next film, it just would not be a complete list of queer horror movies if I didn't bring up the classic, the staple, Rocky Horror Picture Show, which this movie, came out in the 70s, I believe, and it's the film version of what was the popular underground musical. It's got, it's a product of its time. It has some language we definitely don't use now. It's got some gags that we definitely are, I can say, problematic, pretty fucked up, in general. But the reason I'm mentioning this film is because for me as a kid, I saw it in third grade. My dad had a best friend he used to work with because we didn't have cable. And so my dad's friend would record movies on HBO and then lend my dad the tapes. And my dad would bring home like, this is what movie we're going to watch tonight. So he brought home Rocky Horror Picture Show, having been told it was a musical comedy. Was it like a musical comedy horror movie? So he's like, cool. And he puts it in. It's me and my dad and my older sister. And I'm in third grade. She's in fifth grade. And we're watching it. And I'm just like, mind is blown, right? I'm like, oh my God, this is so amazing. Because not only it's like a buffet of decadence for a child, at the time, that whenever I was in third grade, I don't know what year it was, but it was like so informative to me. And I remember my sister immediately was like, this is a porno, this is disgusting. She's real straight, and so she's like, oh, I'll turn it off, and she got all weirded out. Me and my dad watched the rest of the movie. My dad thought it was really fun, and I was just like because I mean, it shows my first kind of experience with seeing gender fluidity and talking about trans folks, although there are some serious issues with the way trans folks are represented in this film. But just even hearing those hearing that people existed that I didn't even know, like the possibility of the world around me, and living in my small little town in Adna, Washington, Rocky Horror Picture Show was like, oh my God, like there is a world out there that I need to see, and it's okay to be me. Like, it's the kind of movie that I was like, I just want to kick in fishnets and like be naked for the rest of the time. And I loved that movie, and I kept the tape and watched it all the time. And my sister constantly gave me crap about it and was like, you're just watching that porno again. I'm like, no. I mean, and then I felt like the movie was really dirty because I hid it like under a pillow. Just it was really weird. But the movie's still an important part of my childhood. Understandably, it has some real serious problematic elements to it. But really informative for me when I was a kid. Next movie I want to mention, it's actually a film from one of the Masters of Horror series that you can, I think the show was on Showtime, I believe. Different horror movie directors filmed these kind of short films. There's a bunch of pretty good ones in this series, but my favorite one, and to me the queerest one, is one called Sick Girl. I saw this movie in my 20s, and it's so good. It's one of the most adorable gay love stories you will ever see framed in a horror film. Basically, the main character, she studies bugs. There is a word for that. I don't remember what it is. She studies bugs. She is kind of a nerd. She's socially awkward. She has a hard time, in the romance department or whatever. She ends up meeting this other girl who is like kind of like a very femme, like an artist, and she falls in love with her. And this girl happens to be the daughter of her boss, so that becomes kind of an issue. But they kind of move in really quickly and they fall in love, and it's very beautiful. But it's a horror movie. So what happens is a weird, rare bug gets sent to her apartment. And at first, her and her girlfriend keep the bug because they think it's so interesting. And it's got a little bit of a racist element where the bug is like, from unknown parts of Africa. Like, ooh, it's an evil, scary bug we have in her. It's kind of terrible. But the bug gets loose in her apartment and ends up laying eggs or something in her girlfriend's head. And then the bug lady doesn't realize this at first. She thinks her girlfriend's just kind of losing it because she starts getting weird and emotional, angry, and then she kind of turns into a half bug, and it gets really gross and scary. But you know what? I'm gonna ruin it, so I don't even know if I should. I'm gonna tell you what happens is they accept it, and the bug lady lets her now bug girlfriend kind of also impregnate her with the bug, and then they like live like two pregnant happy lesbians full of bugs, and it's very cute. It's like, this is a really sweet weird horror movie, and I love it, and you should check it out. It's a Masters of Horror, Sick Girl. It's fun. I'm not going to go into long detail about some of these other movies, but here's a couple other movies on the list that I also really enjoyed throughout my time growing up, and you can check into them yourself. One is Fright Night, the original Fright Night from the 80s. There is a remake with Colin Farrell. It's okay. But watch the original Fright Night. Also, Ginger Snaps is a really great, like, witchy goth sister werewolf film that has practical werewolf effects in it, and you should definitely see that. There's a sequel too, but watch the original Ginger Snaps. Also, High Tension, which is a legitimately scary film. I believe it's French. So it's subtitled, or you can get the dub version, but it's this one's actually scary and extremely gory, so just keep that in mind. But it's a total mindfuck, so check that one out for sure. And lastly, this is not necessarily a horror film. It's kind of a thriller, but Single White Female. It's a very kind of famous thriller from the 90s. Bridget Fonda, Jennifer Jason Leigh. It's real fucked up. It made me scared of white women and roommates and it's heterosexuality. It's really scary. It's like it's just a, you know, lady becomes obsessed with another lady and tries to take over her life. It's weird. Check that one out. Trust me, it's scary. The final movie I want to talk about is not only just for me one of the greatest movies to watch around Halloween. This is a movie I always recommend to everybody I know to watch around Halloween. It's in the horror movie section. It's not scary or whatever. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. It's Elvira, Mistress of the Dark. I love this movie so much. It's so great. And Elvira is, as a character, it was such a huge part of my coming out process as a kid. I was so obsessed with Elvira when I was younger. And obviously, Cassandra Peterson is a beautiful woman. That's the woman who plays Elvira. She's beautiful. You know, she has an amazing body that like defies logic. And she, so yes, I found her definitely physically attractive. But there was something so interesting about the fact that she was comedic. You know, she kind of did this like sort of Valley Girl character, but she kind of owned her own, like the way her image was produced as being super sexual, but she owned it in this way where she was very made fun of herself. It was just, I loved her so much. I was in the fan club as a kid. I'm still in the fan club. I have a membership card. You can still join the Elvira fan club, just so you know. And she's just so great. I loved all of her Movie Macabre series. I also used to rent all these videos she hosted in the 80s and that were called Thriller Video that have a lot of Hammer horror movies in them. So good. This is her first feature film as the character. She's the main character. It's so good. It stands the test of time. The storyline is she plays herself. You know, Elvira plays herself, where she's trying to fund a big Vegas show, but she got fired, or she quit her horror hostess job because one of the guys from the station like sexually harassed her and like literally grabbed her boob and said it's milking time, and she like knocks him over, and it's a great scene. But she quits that job, so she has to find a way to get money for this Vegas show she wants to do at the Flamingo. And she ends up having, you know, going on her aunt, one of her great aunts dies, and she finds out she's got that inheritance. So she drives to some tiny town in like Massachusetts or something, which of course is very like witchy, kind of perfect, like Puritan little town. And she gets, her car breaks down, so she gets stuck there, and a bunch of wackiness ensues. She finds out that her aunt, her great aunt Morgana, was actually a witch, and so she's also an actual witch. And it's just, she ends up having to battle her uncle Vincent, who's a warlock. And so there's really fun, like actual sorcery, witchcraft stuff in it. There's also a bunch of so many good jokes. And this, like, Elvira just completely has informed my sense of humor. I'm a comedian because of Cassandra Peterson. I think she's so funny. There are jokes in it I did not even get as a kid. I used to rent this movie every Halloween party I had as a kid, which is kind of why all my friends called me gay all the time. And they always thought it was weird I rented it. But it's so good. There were jokes in it that I never understood, but stand the test of time. There's a joke that she makes when a real estate agent tries to hit on her, and he like literally also like accosts her at a house that she's trying to sell. And then her boss calls her, or her agent, and says, "Did you sell the house yet?" And she's like, "Oh, I was just 6 inches from selling this house today." And it's so funny. And as a kid, I like didn't get that. And there's like a part where something falls on her head, and the guy says, "How's your head?" And she's like, "Well, I've never got any complaints." Whatever. It's just like so fun. You got to see it. It's got some actually pretty cool special effects. There's like a monster or two in it. There's a whole witch like burning scene. She's got a familiar who turns into different animals. It's so good. Elvira, Mistress of the Dark, greatest Halloween movie of all time. Absolutely informed my queerness growing up because I love her so much. I hope you enjoyed this list of movies that were very queer to me growing up and that I still enjoy as a queer person. If you have your own favorite queer horror movies, feel free to list them in the comments. Let us know your thoughts on these films or other ones. Also, if you like the video, please like it, like digitally, and also share it and subscribe. So I hope you enjoyed it. This has been the Bi-Geekly Report with Jet Space Magazine. I've been your host, Elle Sanchez. Happy Halloween, or Homoween, or Halloween, whatever you celebrate. Please have a good time.